Welcome to the Legislate podcast, a place to learn about the latest insights and trends in business, technology, and contract drafting. Today, I'm excited to welcome Tom Willmot on the show. Tom is the co-founder and CEO at HumanMade, the enterprise WordPress agency, which has worked with brands such as TechCrunch, Google, and The Sun. Tom, thank you for taking the time. Would you like to please share a bit of background about yourself and HumanMade?
Sure, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. So my name's Tom. I'm the CEO of HumanMade. I live over in France with my wife and two kids. HumanMade is a remote company and has been since its inception about 12 years ago. Hence the reason I'm able to live out in rural France and still run a tech company. We're about 100 people spread across around, I think, 26 countries at last count. And as you said, we specialize in kind of high-end WordPress. So that's in the form of our agency work, where we're working usually with kind of big name brands or kind of complicated enterprise clients who are using WordPress usually for kind of mission critical things. Think kind of digital platforms. Maybe they're spending $500,000 plus a year or something, and they're using WordPress as part of that, and they need to go beyond the kind of default. The default out of the box WordPress experience, and then alongside our agency we have a WordPress powered platform, which is really kind of cloud hosting plus a kind of tool set for marketers. So that's all about kind of bringing the power of WordPress and the benefits of open source to kind of ambitious enterprise marketing teams who they love the ease of use of WordPress, but they wish it had some additional features and perhaps they're struggling to get it past their IT teams and compliance. We kind of specialize in that bit, bridging that gap.
That's great. And I guess for our listeners, I mean, I'm sure most people have heard of WordPress, but
Sure.
Are you able to just give
Of course.
a quick 101?
Yeah. So it is. It's the world's most popular content management system. And so I think something like 45% of the top 1 million sites are running WordPress. So that's really, it's the piece of software which you, as the owner of the site, log into and edit your content, publish your pages through that. And so it's got incredibly high market share on the one side, which makes it quite interesting. It's become kind of the operating system for the open web almost. Everybody uses it, and it's all the way from the kind of long tail. It's very very quick and easy to get started, all the way up to the high end. All the Fortune 2000 use it in one capacity or another. And then I think the other interesting thing about it is it's open source, right? So it's developed by volunteers. It's a long-running project. It's about to hit its 20th anniversary actually this year, 20th birthday. So that's pretty exciting. Hundreds, perhaps even a couple of thousand people around the world volunteer their time to build that software. That's a big part of our ethos as a company. We kind of grew up out of that open source ecosystem. And have then built a business around it, and you find that's pretty common in the WordPress ecosystem. There's a lot of businesses that kind of grew up out of that open source community and have found a way to offer additional value add services around that kind of core open source platform.
Yeah, thank you very much for the rundown and disclaimer. We don't actually use WordPress.
I was going to ask. I mean, maybe you use it, but you probably had a choice to use it at some point.
I think. I mean, I am a bit of a website geek, and I do have a couple of domains running on WordPress. But I personally am more comfortable with Webflow, and
nice.
But that is just because it's the first tool I started using, and therefore have a bit of a bias towards Webflow.
That makes sense. Yeah, I love Webflow as well. That's also a really great tool.
But I'm impressed that I was on your website and that you have worked with companies like TechCrunch. I'm impressed that they actually use WordPress. That's great.
Nice.
So since starting the company 12 years ago, what's been your favorite moment so far?
I mean, that's a somewhat difficult question, I suppose. Like it's the running a company for that long has many highs and lows, as I'm sure you'll be experiencing too. My favorite moment. I mean, I would say it's difficult to pick one, but I mean, my favorite moments are we're a distributed company, and so as I said, there's people all over the world, and we're all working together remotely. Something that's not uncommon these days at all. that was uncommon when we started doing it. And once a year, we all get together as a company for our annual company meetup. Those are usually where my favorite moments happen. We work really intensely together all year, but also strangely, we don't really. The best we can do is video chat, and that always leaves something to be desired. And so usually when we come together as a group, and we've got this. We both feel like we're meeting each other for the first time because we've not spent that much time actually in person together. But also we know each other incredibly well because we've been working together very closely. And as I said, I've kind of experienced the highs and lows of business that year. So those usually end up being very intense and very rewarding weeks together. We usually try and do them in a different place each year, somewhere super cool. We did one in a castle in Italy and another one in Sri Lanka the year after that. We just did one last year in Greece. So yeah, those are usually pretty great, and especially because we're so like broadly distributed. We've got people coming from kind of all countries and continents across the world, so it's also like a real. It's always fascinating, like learning about each other's cultures and countries. People sharing their stories of where they're from and what life's like wherever that is. Those are probably my favorite moments.
And I guess with a team that's so big, it must be quite a logistical operation.
Yes. Yeah, it is hugely so. I mean, I remember with some fondness, I won't lie, the early days where there was just a handful of us and we really could all just jump on a plane somewhere and hire a big Airbnb and figure it all out ourselves. And then through the years, that became less and less possible. And now it's like akin to organizing a medium-sized conference or something. It's difficult to find venues that can take that many people, and the logistics of all the catering and the transport and the health and safety and the structure of the work while we're there. And with that many people, of course, there's enough people that things always go wrong with some people inevitably. And so, it's usually is something we need to start organizing several months in advance. And it's not unusual for people who work here, that they perhaps are not used to traveling so remotely, so far. Also, like I know when we went to Sri Lanka, we had quite a lot of people who'd, that was a big deal to travel all that way. They're pretty logistically complicated. And to be honest, if anything, we're starting to shift to like an 18-month cycle or something, just because 12 months ends up being a pretty short amount of time to turn around a trip of that size.
Yeah. No, that sounds like a challenge, but a fun challenge.
It is. Yeah.
And what do you wish you'd known before starting Human Made?
Gosh. I mean, so many things, in fact, I was chatting to a friend just a few months ago who'd run a company of a slightly larger than Human Made, actually, and then had exited that company and was starting again. And I was definitely thinking, gosh, imagine getting to start again, but with everything you've learned and all the experience. It's kind of like that's a pretty attractive proposition. What do I wish I'd have known if I was starting Human Made? I don't know. In some ways, I worry actually that had I have known everything, I perhaps wouldn't have gone into it, so naively. I'm kind of a bit of a believer in the importance of naivete for big life decisions like that. So maybe actually I would. I would even if I did meet my younger self, perhaps I wouldn't tell them everything. Perhaps I'd just give them a little push and say, go for it, it'll be all right.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And obviously before starting a company, everyone says it's hard, but you never know until you actually start.
No, and you just don't know which bits you're going to find hard, and which bits are ultimately going to be the bits that are rewarding and give you the energy to keep going through those hard times. So I don't know if there's any one specific thing as much as just encouragement to do it.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah.
And you've been around for 12 years. Where do you see yourself and Human Made in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting time for the web and I think particularly the open web and for WordPress, which is one of the leading open web platforms. And I think particularly for enterprise, I think we're kind of coming out of a cycle of some of these really large enterprise platforms like Adobe or Sitecore, or there are several of them. They're kind of large, expensive proprietary platforms which offer a lot of features, but ultimately lock clients in and perhaps provide a lot of stuff that companies don't actually really need, so they're kind of paying for stuff they don't need. And so I think we're seeing a bit of a shift back to the open web, even in consumer web. It feels like social media is having a bit of a reckoning. Blogging's back. The kind of open web, I think people are missing that more than ever. And I think there's kind of a business version of that too, becoming more and more important to not have your marketing channels and your publishing channels like totally owned by one of the big tech companies. So I think I think a lot of the kind of prevailing winds are in open source and kind of the open web's favor. And WordPress is definitely the best positioned platform to take advantage of that. And so, that kind of mission of like closing the gap between WordPress and enterprise companies, I see that as really being the highest impact thing we can be doing over the next 10 years. If in 10 years time, the open web and WordPress has really been at the forefront of that, and we've played a crucial role in its continued growth, then I'll be happy.
Right. It seems like you're perfectly positioned to make the most of this trend.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, we should be. So maybe it's ours to mess up.
I don't think so. And as a busy founder, CEO, I imagine you must come across quite a few contracts and legal documents. What are the key contracts you interact with the most?
Yeah, I mean, it's being a distributed company, it's significantly more complicated, I suppose, especially around contracts and kind of legal agreements. Like, we have employees across a lot of countries, and so there ends up being kind of unique situations with all of those. Whether we've got a subsidiary in country that we can employ them through, or some kind of contract relationship, or some third party kind of PEO or something. And then similarly with our clients, again, we're working with clients across the globe, and again, maybe that's through one of our subsidiaries, maybe that's through our UK parent, and so usually it's either employment contracts, MSAs, those kinds of things that we're dealing with most, and we're usually trying to navigate. Generally, the legal business environment is not particularly suited to borderless remote tech companies, as I'm sure you'll be well aware. And so we're usually navigating the friction of that in one way or the other, trying to understand how it can be made to work. Where we know we want to employ this person, or we know we want to work with this client, and trying to figure out a way through to enable that. Yeah.
And with those, for example, employment contracts, what are maybe some of the key issues that you encounter, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, often it's, I mean, the simple, all the way to quite simple things like, employment contracts in some number of countries that we have employees in, they require like hard copies and wet signatures and notarized documents and things like that. That's still a common side mission I have on most of my international trips. Is it's an opportunity to pop into a notary wherever I am and do update my notarized documents in that country, so that we can then continue to use them. And that can get pretty complicated. Like I'm going through that at the moment with our Australian subsidiary. I need to notarize my passport and a bunch of other stuff, to satisfy the requirements of being a director of a company there. And they are not well set up for doing that, online with someone out of country. So yeah, that tends to be, a fairly simple thing. But the difference between being able to sign something online or like email a scan versus hard copies can actually have a big impact. There have been occasions where we have literally had to fly to another country in order to sign a contract or something, which is ludicrous in today's world. And then probably the more complicated answer is a end of that is like the amount of local jurisdiction kind of law knowledge we end up needing. So a not so nice example, but we recently went through a round of layoffs, and we had to work with like a HR advice team in every single jurisdiction. And so that massively complicates any situation like that, whether it's hiring or changes to our employment policies or whatever. There's a huge amount of local law work that we need to then find partner law firms for in those local jurisdictions, and usually pay a lot of money for a bit of specific advice, which is frustrating.
Yeah, it definitely sounds complicated when
Yes.
you are in so many locations, but I'm sure the benefits outweigh the costs.
Yeah, I mean, one of our principles of, being a distributed company and hiring people remotely, we really work hard to abstract away that complication from our employees. Like, it's kind of not their fault they're being hired by a remote company. We take that responsibility on, and we try and offer as much as we can, a kind of universal experience to employees, and a kind of fair and balanced set of policies across all those jurisdictions. So again, we're the ones eating the cost always of the complexity of trying to balance all of those different, sometimes competing local jurisdictions.
Yeah, one thing that we've encountered is we set up a branch in Spain because our software team is in
Nice.
Spain, and there's obviously a difference between holidays,
Yes.
but there are all sorts of Spanish laws that we weren't aware of that our local advisor has told us about, and that's been a very interesting process. But
yeah, absolutely, and it can quite quickly become like a significant part of or it adds friction to everything that you're wanting to do then around holiday policy or whatever.
But well, thank you for sharing. And Tom, I'm conscious I've already taken a lot of your time, so I'm going to ask you the closing question we ask all our guests. If you're being sent a contract to sign today, what would impress you?
I mean, I think the thing that impresses me most is like the brevity and conciseness and kind of level of ease of understanding. I was a big fan back in the day when I was a freelance web designer prior to founding HumanMade, and I forget his name now, but there was a web designer in the UK, Andy Clark, his name was, and he'd shared his the contract he developed for all of his freelance work, and it was like a one-page, nicely written. So I was always a fan of as little kind of overly legalese speak as possible. That's definitely not reflected in most of our contracts these days. I've had to give up on quite a lot of that as we've grown. I think that's probably the thing that would impress me most, would be like brevity, conciseness, and reasonableness of the language. And then, I mean, it definitely comes down to just like the ease of then interacting with that, like the difference between being able to just sign something online and being pointed to exactly which bits of the contract you need to fill in. Like that's something another simple thing, but like I'll get a big pack of documents through the post. I don't even know, I miss the little bit that highlights these are the fields you need to fill in. I don't even know what I'm supposed to fill in, those are probably the two things that impress me most. And when it the difference between a slick kind of concise contract, which tells you exactly which fields to fill in, and you can do it on your phone. I mean, that can be a 5-minute interaction versus I've got to block out half a day and deal with this paper version and go and FedEx it across the country. And there's actually a huge difference between those two experiences. And as someone who runs a remote company, I'm excited by this shift to remote we've seen in the last few years, because I feel like that's going to drive a lot of innovation in this kind of thing, where like this has been very high friction for quite a long time, and it hasn't really been the innovation you'd want. I guess mostly because there was only a few of us who really were all in on remote. Now it's kind of everyone's problem. I think we're going to do a much better job of solving it quickly, so that's quite exciting.
Yeah, I definitely think the pandemic helped accelerate the shift towards e-signatures, and
Yeah.
I do know there's also been quite a lot of lobbying to um, make digital signatures more accepted, especially
Yes.
for things like witnessing, because
Mm,
ultimately the server is witnessing you sign.
right.
Why do,
Right.
why do you need
Why do I need to get someone
someone?
else to do it? Yeah.
Exactly. So
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, hopefully countries like Australia will follow then.
Hope so.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
yeah, well, thank you very much, Tom, for taking the time to be on the podcast. Best of luck growing Human Made, and look forward to staying in touch.
Cool. Thanks very much, Charles. Appreciate the invite to be on, and best of luck with everything you're doing at Legislate.
Thank you. Goodbye.